So Y7 is sweat dripping, beat bumping, candlelit yoga. We took out the mirrors and we really tried to make a safe space where anybody, no matter their practice level or where they are, in their life or where they are with their bodies, they can feel comfortable to work on whatever they need to that day.
Can we still call yoga in the West yoga? So, like I have mentioned before, was a yoga teacher for about 8 years, and I noticed a major difference between how yoga is practiced in the West and in the East, where it originates from, India, specifically when I say the East. So off the bat, I already can tell you that oftentimes yoga in the West, the foundations of yoga is not applied. The 8 limbs of yoga aren't really applied. In fact, when I became a yoga teacher, none of it was taught to us. I had to learn it myself, which is fine, and I'm not here to hate on anyone or anything. But the question I've been asking in the past 2 years of if yoga in the West should really be called yoga. If you look at other types of physical movement that specifically stem from the East, Taekwondo, other types of martial arts, they still resemble and carry the same foundations as the original practices. However, with yoga in the West, it's become very, very different. A few examples are what I started off with, how we have adopted hip-hop yoga in the West. Now, I will be doing an episode dedicated specifically to studios that use hip-hop and my opinion of it, and just show you the different parallels as to why I think they do it and so forth. I'm really excited to do that. But this episode, we're going to focus on how I feel that we should no longer call yoga in the West yoga. I think we should develop another word for it. Something that sparked my thought process of this was actually a long time ago. It was about 6 years ago, 2015, when I was speaking to a colleague. I used to work at a restaurant, and at that time I was teaching yoga. I was teaching part-time and working at a restaurant part-time. And I was speaking to one of my colleagues, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I love yoga." And I didn't come from a judgmental place. I just wanted to know what kind of yoga she practiced. And she was like, "Oh, I just go on YouTube and I find this thing." And she showed me some clips on Instagram, some people that she follows, that she described as yoga. And I said to her that is not yoga. Yoga is the 8 limbs of yoga. It's dharana, it's pranayama, it's asana, it's all these different things that make up yoga. And she looked at me like I had a third eye, like 3 eyes growing out of my head. So it really got me thinking that I feel like a lot of what we practice in the West, and it's not to talk down upon it, it's just to ask if we should still be calling yoga when the foundations, the 8 limbs, are not being practiced. I love Instagram. I know a lot of people hate on it. I am not one of those people. I think it's a great platform. I've been able to build my platform. I've been able to meet people through Instagram. Just social media in general. I feel like it is what you use it for. So if you're focusing on negativity, that amplifies. If you focus on positivity, that amplifies. It sounds very generic, but that's just been my experience. So I noticed through Instagram, even though I love it, I've noticed that there's a lot of like yoga posting, and I post pictures too, but I think it's created this image that yoga is postures. Yoga is just asana. Even the way I feel like yoga is being taught, specifically in modern style studios, like places where they do hip-hop yoga, or places, I don't want to know specific studios, but places that don't really teach the foundations of yoga. They don't ask and require more understanding from their students, I think, because it's about financial gain. But they limit the growth of students, and they limit what the word yoga is. Yoga is union. But there are foundations from the traditional aspect of yoga that I believe the West has completely lost.
And primarily athletic wear. I love Lululemon, Nike, Adidas, just clothes that makes you feel so good when you work out.
So if you look at a lot of martial art practices, they have stuck to the foundation of the traditions. So you no longer, well, you won't find somebody who practices a specific type of karate in another form of dress or so forth. And dress often implies to me that some aspects of the tradition have stayed the same, just in a physical appearance alone. So if you look at a lot of yogis nowadays, I mean, it depends where you practice, but a lot of yogis nowadays in the 21st century in the West are used to wearing yoga leggings, depending where you are, yoga leggings and a sports bra and a top if you're a woman. And for men, it's yoga leggings and so forth. So that automatically, compared to how traditionally in yoga in India they practice yoga usually with a specific dress, or in some aspects they basically just wear well, if it's depending on the yoga, but if sometimes it's literally just a piece of cloth to cover the private area. So that stark difference implies to me that we have really separated in the West what yoga is. And not only that, I use dress as an example to show you how different it is. Not only that, but there's also been tons of money made off of it. So if you go to a yoga studio, as I used to work front desk too, so I can already tell you that they tell you you'll need to buy water. They'll tell you that you need to buy a mat. They'll tell you need all these things to practice. And you might need them, yes, but I'm pretty sure that you can practice yoga. You're meant to be able to practice yoga without that, with just a mat, your body and your mind, the union. That's what yoga means. So I'm not trying to say that it has become commercialized. I think it has that in that way that people often want to just sell you things. You'll see people now have things for their hands, they have things for their feet, and adding all these extra additions to a practice that we might not necessarily need, but because in Western society, and I love living in the West, I'm very grateful too, but in Western society we have adopted an idea that we can make money off of anything. So that's why there's often yoga blocks, all these kinds of things. I mean, I love yoga blocks to practice, but then you'll find there's like something for your yoga block, you'll find there's something for your water bottle. So I think with having all these extra things, we lose the foundation of the simplicity of yoga, the union between mind, body, and spirit.
I was conscious in my mother's womb. On one side, I wanted to express myself as a human being. Yet, on the other side, I didn't, because I felt I was spirit.
Yogananda happens to be what I would call a spiritual prodigy.
So just a brief history of when yoga came to the United States of America, where I live, and parts of Europe, where I've frequented and have lived too. So in the 1960s was when yoga came to the United States of America, which is what we can documented. And one of the first yogis, his name was Yogananda, and he started a few different yoga studios, or rather yoga temples, yoga spaces in California, and then it spread to other parts of America. So before that, if you know the history of yoga, I'm just going to simplify it. There had been a ban on yoga as a practice. The British had banned yoga and said it was like black magic and it wasn't allowed to be practiced. So oftentimes people would practice yoga in the privacy of their homes or just in secret so that they wouldn't get into trouble and so that they wouldn't have obviously be arrested, unfortunately, but also so that people didn't look at them in a certain way. And I read the autobiography of a yogi. I highly recommend reading it. In fact, I'll put a link in whatever podcast you're listening to this through, or YouTube if you're watching it through YouTube. But when I read it, something very significant stuck out to me, and Yogananda explains how he felt a lot of racism and he felt like an outsider. People used to look at him funny for how he dressed, and he just clearly felt very different. So that automatically made me think that if yoga was practiced in the traditional way in the West, you know, with if you practice, for example, Ashtanga, you know, with the headdress, and some other types of yoga, just different looking to how we dress in the West, would that deter people from coming to practice? And it just made me think many different things. You know, I used to have a friend that was big into Kundalini. He became a yoga teacher actually, and he would wear, I totally forgot the name of dress, but he would wear a headdress on his head. It symbolized purity and protection of your mind and protection of your energy. So all these factors that came to Kundalini yoga that were derived from Kundalini yoga specific. So it just made me think, like, how if it was packaged as that, would as many people practice yoga today as they do in the West? And considering the background of yoga, that they've been able to keep the traditions even though it was banned for so many years, generations, about 3 or 4 generations of yogis, it was banned in India to practice. It just makes me wonder if we have watered down yoga in the West to appease how we feel comfortable, and if comfortability and simplicity and our ignorance plays a part in why we have chosen to wear what we have decided to wear. Another aspect of how Western society has influenced our practice of yoga in the West is music, and I've definitely been guilty of that. When I first started practicing a lot, I would really love when the yoga teacher would play particular songs that I liked. It would draw me in and it would really keep me enthralled. So when I started practicing Bikram yoga about 11 years ago, the fact that it didn't have music was very deterring to me. I was like, I'm not going to practice yoga without music. But once I got really into the practice, in fact, when I started practicing about 11 years ago, I have practiced at least twice a week, every week, since I started practicing. So I think sometimes we can use music as a way to draw people in, but we're not really getting like the full aspect or the full practice of yoga. I want to compare Bikram yoga and, for example, a hip-hop based studio and the differences that I have found. So like I have mentioned, used to teach Bikram yoga, and I was a practitioner for a long time. I'm just a huge fan of that practice. I think there is nothing else like it in this world. So I practiced it for a while, and I've noticed that there have been kind of bootleg versions of it. Some applying music, some, making up their own thing, where they take hot yoga and they make their own thing. So what I find extremely powerful about Bikram yoga in particular is that it's a set sequence designed for the body. So it starts with a breath work to heat you up, and at the end there's a breath work to cool you down. So in a lot of these hot yoga studios, I've noticed, particularly in the hip hop yoga studios, they lack the foundation of heating the body up. Heating the body up really creates a foundation for you to practice safely, and it also creates a foundation for you to not get sick and so forth if you just throw your body into a hot room and act like your body is meant to be there. So I have noticed that, and the music aspect of it is also kind of jarring. Like when you listen to hip hop, I love hip hop. It's one of my favorite genres of music, but I don't necessarily think that yoga should be practiced to hip hop. Yoga is a union, and how much of a union can you have between your mind, body, and spirit if you have the jarring aspect of hip hop? So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. About 3 years ago, I was meant to teach at one of these hip hop yoga studios. I decided to open up my mind and practice from a place of non-judgment and just decide, hey, maybe I should give this a try and get out of my comfort zone about how I've taught yoga before. So one of the requirements to pass this particular course to get training was to take a number of classes. I forgot how much the number was. I think it was like 12 classes, but I was almost at the end. I'd done a bunch of doubles. I was almost at the end. My second to last class, I had a yoga teacher who kept playing the N-word during class. And I made this promise to myself and to loved ones around me that I would never teach at a yoga studio that used the N-word. I think it is completely not necessary for that to happen. So I was in class, and the song, it was Tupac. I forgot particularly which song, because I'm not too much of a Tupac music fan, but the N-word kept playing. And now the instructor was white, and I thought it was very inappropriate for her to be doing that. And I don't usually like to bring race into it, but energetically I just felt that this was wrong on so many levels. Now people want to say cultural appropriation this. I'm not into labeling things like that. I just want to come from a place of decency. And I think to adopt a culture, specifically a practice of yoga, and then to taint it by playing the N-word over and over and over again is very disrespectful to the practice and to anybody that might have an attachment to that word in that practice, especially when there is the clean version of that song. So an instance like that made me rethink if I want to support or teach for these hip-hop yoga studios, because it seems to me like it's more of a trend than it is of the well-being of the student. As a yoga teacher, it is our jobs, well, not my job anymore, but it was my job, to make sure that each student felt welcome, felt like I was giving them enough education, allowed them to grow, and provided a space for them to feel, for lack of a better word, safe enough to practice. So I left you with that story because I don't think that a lot of yoga in the West has adopted the foundation of yoga in the East. I think it has become very ego driven, and that's okay, it can be. But if it is, should we still call yoga as how it is being practiced in the West? Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Please stay tuned for next week. I have something so fun coming up. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please follow so that you get notified for the next episode.